All right. And here we are. I am very excited to be joined today by Jamie Evans. And we're going to get into a whole lot more about what you do and your role in the cannabis industry. But to get started, could you take a minute and give the listeners of Bite Me a personal introduction and maybe also start with your favorite wine and cannabis cultivar?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Evans. I'm also known as the Herb Somm. So, if you haven't heard of what I do, I have a cannabis blog that's focused on the culinary side to cannabis. And then I also do wine and weed experiences out here in California. And my new specialty is cannabis drinks. So, I've been really focused on everything from edibles to drinkables. And really diving into how to cook with cannabis and use it as an ingredient. And so I would say my favorite cannabis and wine pairing probably at the moment. I was thinking about this question when you asked this, Marge, and I actually it was a wonderful pairing. I was actually in Anderson Valley up in Mendocino County. This was a few months ago, and I had done this amazing pairing with Bohemian Chemist. So they are a grower up in Mendocino and Long Meadow Ranch. And so one of the pairings that we had done, we did the Long Meadow Ranch Rosé and then paired that with Bohemian Chemist strawberry milkshake. It was the strain
Mm.
that had these like beautiful strawberry notes, but almost this creamy side to the strain, which tasted so great with rosé. So I would say I'm kind of thinking about spring right now. It's still kind of winter here in California, but yeah, I'm trying to get my palate into the spring mode. So that's what I would say is my
That's totally understandable.
favorite.
I know it's not always a fair question either because people will ask me a favorite of something, and it really depends on my mood and
Yes.
where I am in life at that point in time. So,
Absolutely, yes.
yeah.
And last week it was so rainy and cold, and this week there's just been sunshine and flowers blooming. So I'm definitely, yeah, thinking about those rosé and strawberry milkshake pairings.
Right. Now I am too. That sounds lovely. But now you started out in the wine industry and you've made yourself a name for yourself as a sommelier. And considering your success there, were people surprised when you made the switch into culinary cannabis?
Yes. So this was back in 2017 when I decided to launch my blog, and I had spent over a decade working in the wine industry. And so when I crossed over to cannabis, I was very kind of nervous about what my wine colleagues would think or what they would say. And it was actually when I crossed over, people thought it was so interesting. And this was kind of the time here in California, there was like the Wine and Weed Symposium that had just started, I think, in 2018, which was shortly after that I launched my blog. And I think there was this growing curiosity just in general, especially where I live. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we're very close to the Emerald Triangle. We're close to Napa. So I think, and Sonoma, of course. So all of these things are intersecting anyways. But I was nervous at first, but I was just very surprised at the encouragement and the support that I actually got. And now with cannabis beverages that are really becoming mainstream, we're seeing a lot of crossover from the beverage industry folks coming into cannabis now. So
And that
it's
makes a
been
lot of
fun to
sense.
see.
Like you said, you're in the vicinity of so many beautiful wine countries that and
Yeah.
weed countries. I mean, that totally makes a lot of
Right.
sense. It's nice to hear that people were encouraging of that. And
Yeah.
what drew you to cannabis and culinary cannabis specifically?
Yeah, so living here in the San Francisco Bay Area, of course, like we have culinary everything. It's always been everything that we do here in the Bay Area is very farm to table. And so in 2017, I was actually following the cannabis industry for a while, but I just noticed there was this kind of growing group of cannabis chefs that were in San Francisco. And I just thought it was so fascinating. And so I started going to different networking events, different like underground dinners that were going on. And I just really fell in love with the culinary side and thinking about cannabis as an ingredient and how we can use it to really enhance a meal. So starting in 2018, I started hosting my own events called Thursday Infused. And I partnered with all the cannabis chefs that I was meeting during that time. And then we were doing these coursed menus that were infused. And then coming from the wine industry, I'd pair wines with the meals as well. So it was like this very elevated cannabis experience, but kind of like bringing back like my wine knowledge and tying that within cannabis. But really teaching people how to approach infused food safely and responsibly in this very elevated way. So I did those events all the way up till COVID. And
Mhm.
so it was such a great experience. And yeah, I've just worked with a lot of cool cannabis chefs. So I feel like they've taught me a lot about working with cannabis in the kitchen. And it's definitely kind of led me to where I am today.
That's lovely, and it must be so nice to be in a place where there are so many cannabis chefs that can be sort of out there. 'Cause in
Yeah.
so like, even in Canada, I find that a lot of those infused dinners are still sort of happening underground because 'cause they're kind of in this legal gray area
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
thing,
And they're
so
very much they're still in the gray area here, but I definitely think once cannabis went recreationally legal, I feel like the cannabis chef did, come out to be more prominent.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah, for
especially,
sure.
like, in Los Angeles and San Francisco, there's just a lot of things that are going on,
Lots of
in
opportunities, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So you just came out with a book not that long ago that you co-authored with Jin Chun, and
Yes.
you also wrote The Ultimate Guide to CBD and Cannabis Drinks: Secrets to Crafting CBD and THC Beverages at Home, both of which I own, both of which are
Oh, thank
fantastic
you.
books.
Thank you, Mark.
And this suggests that you're eager to support the home cook, experimenting at home. What do you find unique about CBD in particular and beverages for the home chef?
Yeah, so I think with CBD, it's just such a great place to start if you're a beginner. And I think like as you're starting to cook, there's a lot more room you have to experiment with just CBD because, of course, with THC, you have the risk of getting a little too high
The
if you
stakes
put
are higher, yes.
stakes are so I think CBD was a really great place to start. And yeah, so that was my first book. And The Ultimate Guide to CBD was really a lifestyle book. So not only did it have like a cooking chapter, but it had a self-care chapter where you learn how to make your own facial lotions and hand creams and so on. But also there was a pet treat like a pet chapter where you could learn how to make CBD pet treats. So this is always like I think like out of all my books, like if you're brand new to cannabis and you're like curious about it, The Ultimate Guide to CBD is a perfect option for you to read. And then my second book, Cannabis Drinks: Secrets to Crafting CBD and THC Beverages at Home. It's always a mouthful to say.
Yeah.
uh, so that came out shortly afterwards, and this was a book that I pitched to my publisher because I feel like cannabis drinks were really becoming a focus. And I think the way we can use cannabis to really enhance mixology is super interesting. And after writing that book, I just really wanted to like dive deep into cannabis beverages. So that kind of like ignited my passion and my creativity in that space. But that book really teaches you how to make all different types of beverages. So smoothies, cocktails, mocktails, juices, you name it. And whether you want to use CBD or THC, there's different approaches on how you can work with both. So
Yes, I love that, and I do think I've made plenty of drinks from that book as well, and I've made a lot of the, like, home, DIY, like, body care products because 'cause
yeah,
I've been doing that for a long time, and I love the ones that you have in your book, so I highly recommend them. But beverages are also so interesting because I feel like people are talking about them a lot,
yeah.
and I don't know if they're still, like, they have a big market share yet in dispensaries, but I think that's changing
It's
because
changing slowly. It's
yeah.
still a pretty small category, but I mean, after like even starting my blog since 2017, there's been so many new beverages that have come out. We've
Mhm.
cannabis infused wine products, cannabis infused seltzers, and these are all commercially made products that you can find at a delivery service or your local like dispensary. But I think the beauty in creating your own beverages and doing your own infusions, so making like an infused simple syrup, infused bitters. There's a lot of creative ways that you can enhance your own beverages. And many people don't think about that right away. So once they learn how to create these like pantry items, you can really infuse any beverage.
Yes, I love that because I'm a big fan of the DIY and having a little control over what you're consuming as well, because
Yes.
that is a big factor.
Oh,
But you're
absolutely.
yeah, so you're someone who loves wine and you love cannabis. And I've spoken to a lot of chefs who would normally not recommend combining the 2, but of
Yes.
course, a lot of us still do it anyway, myself included.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to combine their cannabis and their alcohol?
Yeah. So number
Wine.
one, it's all about moderation.
Mhm.
So start low, go slow, like we say in the cannabis space, anyhow. But I would say if you're thinking about pairing the two, definitely do so in moderation. But also, I love to think about if you're pairing the two together. I love to compare or contrast like those wine and cannabis flavors to find the perfect matches. So really think about the wine and cannabis like a sommelier would think about pairing wine with a food. and
Mhm.
like find those similarities and those common nuances to pair together. And there is so many great ways to do this. Like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I was up in Anderson Valley and had led people through this experience. And a lot of people had never paired wine and cannabis before. And it was so cool because we actually had wine sourced from Anderson Valley, cannabis sourced from Anderson Valley, and the farms were about a mile apart from each other.
Mm.
So there's actually these very cool regional expressions that you could find in both the wine and cannabis. And then as you're pairing the two together, you could actually pick out kind of those similarities, which was it was a really cool thing to do, especially with people who had never been to Anderson Valley or who had never actually paired wine and cannabis together. So
So you're really sort of focusing on the terroir of
yeah,
both the cannabis and the wine, which is really cool. I love that because I know there's a big movement. I don't know if it's big, but a movement in California to sort of recognize the terroir for a lot of the cannabis farms that are out there.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's super interesting because it makes sense to me that where it's grown is going to dictate how it expresses itself.
Oh,
Now, when you're
absolutely.
doing these experiences, are people like vaporizing the cannabis? How are they consuming the cannabis with the wine?
So my favorite way is definitely doing like a dry flower vaporizer because you're really tasting those terpenes
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
you're comparing that to the wine. Because I think anytime you're like combusting or lighting something, you're getting that like kind of smoke taint on your palate. So it's a
Mhm.
little hard to distinguish the pairing, but yeah, a dry flower vaporizer does an incredible job. And then, yeah, I've done it with like vapes, but I have done it with just like a pipe and flower too. So it really depends on the experience. But I think the best kind of flavor really comes from that dry flower vaporizer.
Right, and I personally love a dry flower
Yeah,
vaporizer as well,
me
so,
too. I love the
um
terpenes.
yes, I know the first time I tried a dry herb vape, I was just like it was, like, mind-blowing because
Yeah.
I was like, "This is what people are talking about." Because I'd heard so many people say, "Oh, it tastes like marshmallows or
Mhm.
strawberries," or whatever the case was, and I never could really pick that out until I tried a dry herb vape, and then that was sort of a game changer for me, so,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
if you
but
want
even
to
if
experience
you're
the terbs.
oh, yeah, for sure, and even if you're doing this experience at home and if you just have a joint, like, before you actually light it up, there's something called the dry pull. You
Mhm.
actually put the joint in your mouth and you just kind of without lighting it, you just suck in and you can taste the terpenes before you actually light, the pre-roll. So there's different ways that you can do it, but, yeah, I think it's
Yes,
all about kind of experience, those aromas and flavors of both the wine and cannabis together.
yes, and the dry pull is a very good piece of advice because a lot of people probably don't know that you can do that, but it's
Right.
remarkable how much the flavor comes through even on an unlit joint, so
Yeah, for
people, if
sure.
you're listening,
It's
try it
amazing.
out, you might be surprised, but, you're also obviously, you're an expert in mixology. Are there any important considerations for people who are wanting to make infused drinks at home, whether they're alcoholic or not?
Of course. So I always say to use terpene inspired ingredients in your drinks and to not mask the flavor of cannabis, but complement it. So in all of my recipe books, I always use terpene rich ingredients, whether it's like lavender, mint, citrus, and all of these things that really complement those cannabis notes and kind of play up all of those nuances that are together. And I also love using like fresh squeezed juices over concentrates, and then muddled berries, like any type of fresh ingredient that you can incorporate into your drink. It's going to taste so darn good. And then making your own pantry items that are infused with cannabis. We talked about this earlier, but making your own cannabis infused simple syrups, your own cannabis infused bitters. And the best thing is, in all my books, I actually recommend using cannabis flower. You could also use concentrates to make some of these infusions. But I love making your own pantry item because you can actually pick your favorite cannabis strain to work with and then incorporate that into your recipe. And depending on what you're creating, you can also pick like a cannabis strain. If you want like strawberry or citrus or like those limonene notes, you can pick a strain that really matches the recipes that you're making.
Right.
So it gives you the power to really customize what you're creating.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of building your cannabis pantry,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, because I think once you have some of those ingredients,
Oh,
then
it's
when
great.
you wanna make a drink, they're there ready for you, or whatever it is that you're trying to infuse or bake or cook. So,
Absolutely, yeah, so that includes, like, cannabis-infused butter, olive
mhm.
oil, coconut oil. If you look in my refrigerator, I have so many different types of infusions. And so it's really fun to have that though, because then you can pretty much infuse anything you want
Yeah.
at any time. But yeah, if you're doing that and you're leaving it in your main refrigerator, always be sure to label everything. And if
Yes.
you have children, make sure to put that far, far away where they can reach in a safe space. So
Yes. And I'm
um,
glad you mentioned that. I always remind people to label things because I've heard
oh yeah,
stories of people who have inadvertently eaten something they didn't realize was infused. It hasn't happened in
yes,
my house, but not on my watch anyway, but I have heard that happening to people. But I also like that you touched on complementing the flavor of the cannabis instead of masking it because I think traditionally a lot of people are like, "Oh, I need to mask the taste."
hmm
And complementing it is such a fresh way of looking at it, I think, and sort of gives you a little more wiggle room with what you're going to be ending up with as
yeah,
an end
absolutely.
product.
I think
Yeah.
the end product definitely turns out better. And if you're using those ingredients that kind of complement all of those like terpene flavors, it just works out incredibly well.
Mhm. Now, are there any necessary tools that the home mixologist might benefit from
Yes.
having? Yeah.
So definitely a shaker tin. I use that
Okay.
all the time. And when you're using a shaker tin, like if you're using like citrus drinks, it like really wakens up the citrus. So I use the shaker tin all the time. And it's also a great way to kind of integrate your cannabinoids into your drinks. You're really emulsifying it very, very well. So you're not separating anything apart. A muddler is something that I
Mhm.
use very often. So if you're doing like an infused mojito or anything where you're muddling berries, that's something that you should have on hand. A fine mush strainer, a hawthorn strainer. So you're straining out the solids from your liquids. And then I would say when you're doing infusions, I always have like cheesecloth on hand, a candy thermometer to really keep an eye on temperatures because anytime you're cooking with cannabis, you want to be sure that you're, cooking as low heat as possible so you can really
Mhm.
preserve those cannabinoids and terpenes. So
Yes.
yeah, keeping an eye on temperature is incredibly important.
Yeah, I just picked up a shaker tin recently, actually. It's about time I
Okay.
got one, but I think that'll change the game a little bit too. So
Yes.
now your High Times Let's Get Baked explores non-traditional edibles. There it is. I have my copy right here as
Oh,
well.
perfect. There it
Super
is.
excited. I asked for it for Christmas and I
Oh,
asked and you
good.
shall receive. So
It's a
no,
beautiful book. I
it
think
really is.
yeah, we worked with Ava Kalenko, who is the photographer, and she just really brought our recipes to life in such a colorful way. So yeah, very
Yeah,
proud of.
it's a beautiful book. And but you explore non-traditional edibles in that book. And there's no I looked through it before this interview to double check, but I didn't see any recipes for brownies or cookies, but it was a focus on sophisticated sweets, savory options, and Asian-inspired cannabis cooking.
Yeah.
So what drove you to focus on these specific themes in the book instead of the more traditional stuff that we're more accustomed to?
Yeah. So I think when we were thinking about like the theme for the book, we really wanted to do something different and out of the box. And my co-author, Chef Haijin Chun, she is absolutely amazing. She actually does a lot of Korean fusion food. So we really wanted to lean in into her specialty. And so a lot of our recipes in the book, they do play off like the Asian Korean cuisine flavors. And even in some of my recipes for the drinks, I made a kimchi Bloody Mary, which is probably one of my favorite Bloody Marys I've ever made, but also like a shiso mojito, and really using these ingredients to do something different. And I think like as we're becoming in this modern world of cooking, I think we love using different types of ingredients rather than just your typical brownie. So we really wanted to do something out of the box. So I hope people are enjoying what we've created.
I don't see how they can't, and the one that I have my particular eye on, I've already infused the tequila, is the Serrano pineapple
Yes.
margarita, so I'm super excited
That
for
was also
trying that.
my other favorite.
Yeah, the only thing I haven't managed to get yet, and I just haven't looked for it really hard, is the chili lime salt. So as soon as I have that, I will be crafting it. So I'm looking
Yes.
forward to that. But your collaboration with Heijin Chun is really intriguing. Can you talk about the partnership and how
Yeah.
it influenced the content and your approach?
Absolutely. So when I was doing my Thursday infused events, we had partnered on an event. I think this was back in 2018. So we were always very big fans of each other's work, and it was almost full circle that we'd be able to work on this book together. So when High Times reached out, it was the perfect opportunity for us to collaborate, but also work with High Times, which is one of the most influential cannabis publications in the world, to really create something that's different, and so colorful and flavorful. So I think throughout this process, we've become, I mean, we've been good friends before this, but now we're like just like soul sisters. And this has really
Aw.
been such a cool project. We're so proud of our book baby. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I love hearing that you're soul sisters and you made a real connection through working on this book. Because 'cause I've heard
yeah.
from numerous authors of all kinds that writing a book is super challenging. There's a lot of
Mhm.
challenges involved with getting a book t out to publish, so
Yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and like this day and age of publishing, publishers want your book like very, very quickly.
Right.
So we had to work very efficiently, and yeah, I mean, we met all the deadlines and were able to get it done. But yeah,
Yeah.
we worked incredibly well together. And then also, I mentioned Ava and her photography team. It was really a dream, working with them and seeing them in action during the photo shoot. And we had a food stylist there as well. So it was so cool to see just how these recipes came to life. And yeah,
Right.
it was
Yeah, the
very,
photographs in the book are worth it alone because they are beautiful. It's like a coffee table book.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's stunning and very eye catching. I think the cover, if it's on a bookshelf, you're going to like be drawn to it right
Yes.
away. And to
Yes.
get this shot alone, this this took
Yeah.
us multiple takes, but yeah, this is my co-author's hand, but it turned
Oh,
out
is
so well.
that that's lovely. Yeah. Now, clearly, cannabis-infused edibles have come a long way in terms of flavor and sophistication, as you can see from your book, and I think that a lot of people, if they've been doing edibles for a while, are looking for something besides the traditional brownie and
Mm.
cookie, not that they don't have their place, but have you observed any exciting trends in the edibles world recently?
I have. I think we're really moving towards like there's so many sweet edibles out there, and that's kind of where the
Mhm.
edible space started. But I get really excited when we're going to like the savory world.
Yes.
I personally love savory things very much. So when I see like a cannabis infused sriracha or cannabis infused like rosemary crackers, like I just think that's so cool. And we're starting to see a lot more savory products come out. And then in our cookbook alone, too, we wanted to have a savory chapter and really focus on things that aren't necessarily your candies or your brownies and cookies and such. So yeah, I think the savory category is something to keep an eye on.
And I think that that also suggests that the home cook or the consumer is starting to get a little more sophisticated as well, because also health conscious, because a lot of people don't necessarily want to ingest their
Mhm.
cannabis through a sugar-laden cookie as much as I have
Right,
a sweet tooth and enjoy them. That's one of the reasons I infuse my baked goods is so I don't eat too many, but
right.
but
Yeah,
still, I mean, a lot of the times you want to branch out beyond that, and I think people are looking for that. So I
yeah.
think you're onto something with that. Now, for me, 2024, I've declared for myself the year of community, and
Mm.
that's influenced by many things, but one of those big influences is cannabis. And can you talk about how you personally find or foster community through cannabis?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started my blog and just focusing on culinary cannabis in general, I think cannabis brings people together. And then when you have these dinner experiences, you're actually breaking bread with people, you're enjoying cannabis together and building that community. And it's been so fun to see how people, they come as strangers to these events, but they walk away as best friends. So to
Mhm.
like witness this firsthand is so magical. And I think this is what really has drawn me into culinary cannabis and providing those dinners or bringing people together with infused drinks, and having like culinary cannabis really be the epicenter of that.
Right.
So yeah,
That's beautiful because you are facilitating these connections when you host these types of events, and it's really beautiful to see that, and it gives me
absolutely.
warm and fuzzy feelings.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah. Now there's still a lot of stigma around cannabis, though. I don't know if you feel it as much in California as I might in Canada, although it is legal here. There's still lots of stigma around it. It is gradually changing, but it still exists. How do you navigate the challenges of destigmatization of cannabis in your work?
I think the number one thing is education. So no matter if I'm at an event or speaking engagement or a podcast, it's all about educating people about cannabis and really breaking those stigmas. And so with our cookbook, we try to put as much information in there as possible and make it very approachable for beginners and experts alike. But I think it all comes down to education and, answering questions, providing facts, and helping people kind of guide them through the cannabis world, because it can be very intimidating,
Mhm.
especially if you're new to cannabis. I mean, there's so many different types of products, there's so many different types of applications, and so sometimes it's really hard to even know where to start. But yeah, I think education is the number one thing to really help people change their mind.
Yes, I totally agree because you are right. It is very intimidating. I don't know how some people even step into a dispensary and make decisions when they've never
Right.
used cannabis before, but people do. And thankfully, there's lots of great bud tenders out there that will help them. But
Yeah.
it's overwhelming when, back in the day, it was like
Right.
you bought a bag of weed from some guy or girl and you just smoked what you got. And that was about it for options. But
Right.
thankfully, things have changed in that regard too. So,
Oh, yes.
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 Now, your books and your expertise emphasize the importance of responsible cannabis consumption. What are some of the key messages you hope that the readers will take away from your books and from your High Times Let's Get Baked?
Oh, yeah. So I think key messages is we want to make this very approachable. We want people to cook with cannabis. And so we tried to make it, like I said earlier, very approachable for beginners. So there's everything from how to decarboxylate cannabis, how to make your infusions, and literally providing step-by-step instructions to make it very easy. And also just give general knowledge about how to, dose your edibles, how to approach edibles safely and responsibly, and how to have this wonderful experience when you're cooking with cannabis. Because I think well, for the most part, some people have had this mystery brownie experience and they're very scared to dive back into the edible scene. So as much education as we can provide to give them that wonderful edible experience, that's what we were hoping to accomplish. So
Yes, and I think you do that very well. And because I have a lot of people sometimes when they start out thinking about edibles and they are really intimidated by that. Like
oh
I have
yeah.
to decarb, what's that? And I have to infuse it and do all these things. And I've had the mystery brownie experience myself.
Yeah, me too.
And I think most people who've been involved in edible cannabis at any point have, but it's a healthy fear
It
because
is.
it's not
And
fun.
even when I was hosting my Thursday Infuse events, I would have people come and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so scared to have infused cuisine. I had this terrible experience." And it was so great working with the cannabis chefs at these events because they could precisely dose the meal at whatever dosage the person was comfortable with. So whether they wanted 2.5 milligrams throughout the entire meal or 5 milligrams, the chefs could actually really be precise and give them that comfortable experience, which I think is so key when you're working with edibles, is to have as close of an estimate as possible, so you're not getting overserved or you're not feeling uncomfortable as you're eating. So
Yeah, because that's the
but
last thing you want when people are at a social occasion too, to
yeah,
be like they've overconsumed.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So I
and
think providing that comfortable space is important.
yes, and I found too, now that I've talked to quite a few people about edibles through this show and just outside of Bite Me, is that far more people I think we're starting to realize now that far more people have a lower tolerance than
Yeah,
we probably imagined before, now that we have way more precise ways of figuring out tolerance and testing and all that kind of thing. I hear it
definitely.
over and over and over again. It's like, "Yeah, my tolerance is like 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams."
Yes.
And, it used to be I know people with huge tolerances, but I think far more people have smaller tolerances. So it's yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, the best way to learn your tolerance too is, of course, to experiment, but now there's a lot of incredible products that have different ratios that you can try out and kind of gauge, like, your level of CBD you want, level of THC, and kind of find your perfect ratio. So we're very lucky in this modern day and age of cannabis where we can actually experiment and find that perfect level, which
Right.
which all the products that we have access to nowadays will help you do that. So
Yes, and it's really nice too in a lot of respects if you're in a place where cannabis is legal because you can go to a dispensary, and if you've never done edibles before, you can go buy a 1 milligram edible
yeah,
and try that out and start from there. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, that seems so low," but I've met people where 1 milligrams is like their sweet spot. So if you gave them a 5 milligram edible, they would be having a bad time. And I don't
right.
want to be responsible for anybody having that bad time. So,
Yeah,
because I love edibles and I think
I
I
do
know
too.
it's not for everybody, but
But even
yeah.
if you have like a 5 milligram edible, especially if it's a chocolate and you're kind of new to
Mhm.
the experience, you could actually cut, like if you try
Yes.
to like cut it into quarters and start there and kind of work your way up. That's
Yes.
a great way to do it. Gummies are a little bit more tricky
Yeah.
depending on what the gummy is
Yes.
like.
Yes.
But yeah, I always like always we always say start low, go slow until you find your
Yes.
specific levels.
That's the adage, and if people follow that, they're usually okay. So,
Yep.
yes, exactly.
And to
Now
be patient. That's the other key thing about
yes,
edibles.
yes, and that's
Because
why those memes are out there. When all those
yeah,
memes you see are like, "Oh, these edibles ain't shit," and the next thing you know, someone's taking another one, and then they're
yep,
like, "I've made a horrible mistake." I mean, we've seen all those memes, and they're there, they circulate because people have done that.
right.
So, yes, if you've eaten one and you don't feel anything, maybe wait a
Just
long while.
yeah,
Yes, yes.
exactly.
Now, if you had to choose a favorite recipe from the book, which one would it be, and why would you choose that particular one?
I would say, I mean, I think this Bloody Mary recipe is out of this world crazy. We called it the dankest over the top kimchi Bloody Mary. And as you can see, the garnishes
Yeah, that's incredible.
are over the top. There's
Yes.
even a mini cheeseburger that we included. So it really is like a full meal, but I personally I love Bloody Marys. I love spicy cocktails, savory cocktails. But to use like kimchi as the base, I thought was really fun. And yeah, I think it's absolutely delicious. And then also for food, one of my favorite Hagen recipes. Oh yeah, and I also love the pineapple margarita, as you mentioned
Yes, I
before.
know, I'm so excited to try that one.
That one was delicious. So one of my favorite of Hagen's, I'm trying to find the page. She made this gochujang crab pot pie, and it
Mm,
is absolutely delicious. Oh, here it is. Here's a picture of it. So this pot
yes.
pie, wow. If you like gochujang and you like pot pies, this is absolutely scrumptious. It's a little bit more challenging to make, but highly recommend. Like the first time I tried it, it was just out of this world delicious. And then also the kimchi, the cheese dip is really good too.
Yeah, those both sound really good, and I just happened to pick up some gochujang, like, a couple weeks ago, so I have
Oh
a good
gosh.
supply, so when I have a little
Yep.
more time, because 'cause I'm sure making a pie, a crab pie, like you said, is a little more time consuming, but
Oh yeah.
sometimes it's nice to do a project when you have a little extra time in the
Yeah.
kitchen, so,
It's
yeah.
incredibly decadent as well. So
Oh, yeah, I love that, okay. That's next on the list then. Now,
yeah.
what would surprise people about you, Jamie?
What would surprise people about me? So most people don't know that I'm an avid skier. I actually grew
Okay.
up in Lake Tahoe area in the mountains, and I've been skiing since I was 2 years old. So I love being out in the mountain. It's probably my favorite sport is skiing. So that's
Oh,
probably where you'll find me most in the winter time.
okay.
This winter, it's a little abnormal. We're going to Colombia actually starting tomorrow. So
Oh, wow.
took a large chunk of our winter time, but usually I'm on the mountain.
Right, that's beautiful. As a Canadian, I don't ski, so there you go. You got me
Yeah.
beat on that. But yeah. Now, can you give me any kind of sneak peeks into any upcoming projects that you have?
Oh,
Or
yes. So
something you're excited about?
I have a
Yeah.
very exciting project coming up.
Ooh,
So in July, I actually have another book coming out.
okay.
It'll be my 4th book. It is focused all on drinks again. And so
Mhm.
I should be doing my book cover reveal in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. So this will be coming out in July 2024.
Oh, that's super exciting. I will definitely keep my eye open for that. And where could people find out or see this book reveal or cover reveal and that kind of thing? Where can people find you?
Absolutely. So if you're on Instagram, you can find me at the Herb Somm. My website is theherbsomm.com. So pretty much anywhere is the Herb Somm.
Right.
You can find more information about me. And then all of my books, you can find more information on my website, but they're also available through Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Hopefully your favorite bookstore carries them too. Uh, and yeah, I hope everyone enjoys my books and learning more about culinary cannabis.
Now, and are you still running your wine and weed experiences as well?
Yeah, so the last one I had done was in November.
Mhm.
And so I will be partnering again with a wonderful travel company called Canescape on 420 weekend. So we're going to be doing a really cool experience up in Mendocino. And yeah, so usually during these experiences, I'll do the wine and weed pairing, educate guests on how to do this. And then I think with that experience, it'll be an overnight camp out, and then we'll have
Mm,
dinner as well. So it should be,
beautiful.
yeah, a lovely weekend.
And I'm assuming you would share all this stuff on your social media and on your website if
Absolutely.
people
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
learn more. Okay,
Yes. You'll
perfect.
definitely find when we start posting about it, you'll definitely find more
Yeah.
information. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I just wanna say thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Jamie. I really
Thank you
appreciate
for
it. I'll be watching for your books, your new book, and everything else that you're up to because you really are contributing some beautiful stuff into the cannabis space and the wine space as well.
Wonderful. Well, it was such an honor to be on your show, and I hope your listeners enjoyed our chat. And I look forward to staying in touch and chatting more about culinary cannabis and cannabis drinks and all the fun things.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to it.